Well, hello and welcome to the Inside Out Gardener. Today is August 2nd, 2023. Prime midsummer weather here in the Northeast. It's finally cooled off a bit. And news alert. Last 3 days, temperatures have been 8% below normal. Not making the news, of course, but welcome. A welcome feeling for sure. Well, some surprising information that I've stumbled across and checked a couple different sites to verify it. The much maligned tropical milkweed, which everybody is blaming for increasing the decline of monarch butterflies because it blooms later, and people are saying that the monarch butterfly stays around eating longer and thus doesn't get south of the border quick enough and succumbs to cold weather. Well, sounds good. Just like another one I heard today that the smoke from the Canadian wildfires is causing tomatoes to not ripe because of the smoke in the sky. Well, I'm about 300, 400 miles south of those fires in the middle of New York State, eastern middle of New York State. And we had 2 or 3 weeks of smoky weather, sometimes so smoky it looked like it was permanent fog all day, and it has nothing to do with ripening or slowing the ripening of tomatoes in my yard, but that's another case. So let's get back to tropical milkweed. Okay, if that were the case, if tropical milkweed or any flower that blooms later in the season, late summer or fall, when butterflies should be flying south for the winter, makes them stay around, then why do migrating birds still fly away even though we have hummingbird feeders out all summer? That's a food source. And also bird feeders themselves with bird seed, not to mention the fresh crop of seed in the fall. There's no higher inventory of seed and stuff for birds than there is in the fall, because come wintertime in the spring, all that stuff's eaten up. So it's just one more thing that gets spread around that just needs to stop. And people need to start thinking about things, counting to 3 before they say, well, I read online, or they share something online. It just doesn't work that way, because migration is controlled by daylight and temperatures. It is not controlled by food availability. As a matter of fact, while hummingbirds and other birds and butterflies are on the way south, they stop and they need food to continue that journey. There's no hummingbird in New York State that flies all the way to Mexico or South America, wherever they go, nonstop without stopping for a drink or getting something to eat along the way. Now, what is an issue with tropical milkweed? It's like the butterfly bush, Buddleia. In some parts of the country, they are invasive. So that could be an issue. They're invasive, but they're still food for the butterflies. So, and to back this up, this is from the Butterfly Ranch, butterflyranch.com. And the title of the article is Tropical Milkweed Impact on Monarch Butterflies Vastly Overblown, says not the Huffington Post, not BuzzFeed, not USA Today, but a longtime butterfly researcher. And this article is actually 2 years old, and it was written by Monica Makel on February 22nd, 2021. And the researcher's name is David James, and the article says he takes issue with the loud and persistent claim that non-native milkweeds pose serious threats to monarch butterflies and viability of their migrations. When asked, he says, does it pose a dire threat to butterflies? He was very emphatic, and he says, no, I don't. Not at all, in fact. And his profession, he's a research scientist and agricultural entomologist with Washington State University. Washington State is is a crazy town. The state of Washington, along with Oregon and California, are just whack-a-mole with some of their thoughts, not only on the environment, but just life in general. But there's a couple sane people that are there at Washington State University. David James, the entomologist, and Dr. Linda Scott Chalker, or Linda Chalker Scott. I forget how it goes. She's a PhD in horticulture and very, very right on about the whole thing, like with me on there's no such thing as too big a pot, and that compost teas or banana water or any tea from plant material is a waste of time. Harmless, but a waste of time. So anyway, let's get back to um, David James. He's studied monarch butterflies for more than 4 decades. He specializes on the population in the Pacific Northwest these days. He says that population is much smaller, less famous, and even more at risk than those east of the Rocky Mountains that migrate from Mexico each spring and moves various sites across the Pacific coast. Tropical milkweed, Asclepias karasavakia, I'm sure I screwed that one up, has been much debated as a significant factor in monarch decline and disease for almost a decade, the article goes. According to several studies, presence and the easy to grow, widely available perennial can encourage monarchs to break their reproductive systems and stop migrating. The orange or yellow bloomer is so irresistible to monarchs, some research suggests, that it lures monarchs to lay eggs and start the next generation of butterflies in the fall rather than wait till spring when conditions might be more hospitable. The article also goes on to say research suggests the plant's resilience and appeal could build up the deadly spore-driven disease. I'm not even going to try that one. Ophrocystis electroscura, also known in the monarch world as OE. Article goes on to continue that James contends that the presence of milkweed, native or non-native, is not a primary cue for suspending reproductive or migratory behavior. Changing day lengths and temperatures are, he said. There's something about animals that migrate when daylights shorten and temperatures get cooler. It's time to pack up and head south. This flies directly in the face of tropical milkweed being dangerous to monarchs. And again, like I stated in my point, my hummingbird feeder's out until early October. That doesn't mean the hummingbirds are going to stay around because they got something to eat. It's probably a good idea and probably should be researched a little bit. But like I said, there's no hummingbird that flies directly from the Northeast in New York down to South America or Latin America or Mexico without stopping. They need food along the way. And also, for other birds that are insect or nut eating birds or seed eating birds, there is such a plethora of supply in the fall because that's when all the flowers have gone to seeds and the seeds are all there. They haven't been eaten by animals. They haven't been eaten by other birds over the winter. So why aren't insect eating birds heading south? Well, I mean, not heading south. Well, because there's still bugs around. You just got to know where to find them. So they've got a good reason to go because if you can't find the bugs that are hiding, you might as well head south. But what about the seed eating birds? What about them and the berry eating birds, catbirds, for instance? Why do they head south when there's plenty of seeds and plenty of uh, fruits around on the berries on the hollies, berries on the juniper, cedar waxwings, etc.? I mean, they might stay around. I'm no longer the bird expert I was 10 years ago, but you get the picture. Hummingbirds fly south regardless of how many hummingbird feeders or flowers are in bloom in the end of summer. Seed-eating birds head south in spite of the fact that the pantry is chock full of seed in the end of summer and early fall. So James' study on monarchs began in the 1970s in Sydney, Australia. There he documented winter breeding monarchs on milkweed right next to large clusters of non-breeding ones in nearby trees. The juxtaposition challenge conventional wisdom, the article says that reproductive and non-reproductive monarchs can live side by side, led him to earn a PhD in entomology and write more than a dozen papers on migrating insects. He's quoted as saying, "The science behind assertions that tropical milkweed can terminate migration and reproductive dormancy in eastern monarchs is unfortunately flawed," he said. "A lot more work needs to be done to prove that tropical milkweed itself can terminate dormancy and reproduction in U.S. monarchs," he says, adding that this data does not even exist for Western monarchs. The article goes on to say James' early research suggests that non-reproductive and migratory monarch populations in Australia are not adversely affected by the presence of non-native and other tropical milkweeds, such as Gomphocarpus fructosus and African milkweed, sometimes called swan plant or balloon plant. In fact, James says the presence of milkweed appears to be a prerequisite for the choice of an overwintering sites by monarchs in eastern Australia. All overwintering sites are characterized by milkweed presence. The article goes on to say James' historical perspective and experience, sometimes timely given recent reports of the dramatic decline of California monarch butterfly population, and this year's Thanksgiving count only counted 1,914 butterflies in 2021, was hailed as near extinction. The bad news revived the contentious debate with the tropical milkweed. So once again, you have a low population count and you're automatically going to jump on the bandwagon and blame it on something that you can't prove. James goes on to say, please don't buy into the idea that this research on tropical milkweed is not yet settled. It very much is settled, he said. Davis, on his monarchscience.org website in October, says no reputable monarch scientist recommends that people plant or use milkweed in their gardens and their homes for rearing. Davis firmly believes that monarchs must migrate in order to maintain a healthy population. From my reading of the science, it looks like winter breeding is the antithesis of healthy migration, Davis says, via Dplex, an online discussion group about 800 monarch butterfly enthusiasts, including scientists and citizen scientists. He says, in other words, you can't have it both ways. Have eggs and larvae in the winter and also a healthy migration. If the goal is to promote traditional migration, then you should not be encouraging any winter breeding, like absolutely no milkweed present to tempt them until spring. If the goal is to promote or establish year-round breeding population, you should keep doing what you're doing. James sees it differently. Healthy monarch population is not an absolute proposition of the insects either migrating or reproducing. The article goes on to say when he documented the winter breeding monarchs on non-native milkweeds in company of large clusters of non-breeding monarchs in nearby trees in the 1970s, he says, this intrigued me, and recently adding conventional wisdom dictated that monarchs were not supposed to overwinter next to breeding populations. So there you have it. And he's also not alone in this thought. Chip Taylor, founder of Monarch Watch, this citizen science tagging organization. Wow, can you imagine tagging a butterfly? Monarch Watch is located at the University of Kansas at Lawrence, and he's staying out of the tropical milkweed debate because there are far more important things to worry about. Unfortunately, he mentions climate change. So, number one in everybody's mind, we had customers come into the nursery I work at in Rexford, New York, asking why we had tropical milkweed. Well, it's there for the monarchs. And of course, they're saying, oh, you shouldn't do that. Oh, that's so bad. So there you have Chip Taylor and David James, both monarch experts, saying there's other things to worry about. Jeffrey Glassberg, president of the North American Butterfly Association, has been steadfast in his view that monarch butterflies are highly adaptable and non-native milkweeds serve as a role in sustaining a changing population. In his article published on the North American Butterfly website in 2015. He called tropical milkweed a lifebuoy for monarchs, and his position has not changed. James consists that the OE disease, year-round and milkweeds can build up and cause problems, but it's not the end of the world. He strongly suggests using native milkweeds whenever possible. My research on monarchs in the 1970s and 80s taught me one overriding thing. The monarch is an extremely adaptable creature. Now, nobody's denying the decline in monarchs, but there you have it right there. Monarch Watch, North American Butterfly Association, and thank you to Washington State University for employing people with common sense and data to back up their opinion. That tropical milkweed, although it can be an issue in places where it is invasive, it's not invasive in the Northeast because it won't survive here as a perennial. It's more of an annual because it just gets really whacked back in the cold. Best treated as an annual anyway. Have no issue whatsoever on interrupting either the migration or the egg laying and reproductive status of monarch butterflies. So there you have it. The chatter is going to continue. It's going to go on and on and on, and it's not going to stop because it's easy to see a picture of a beautiful monarch butterfly online and then don't plant tropical milkweed in bold letters underneath it. It's junk science, it's lousy journalism, and it's spread by people who they might mean well, but they don't know what they're talking about. And they certainly don't have any clue if they're just going to copy and paste something or say, well, I read, without following up. Well, what they read is they read somebody that said it. And if it's online, you know it's got to be true because it's all over the Facebook garden groups, the native plant pages, etc. And there's one native plant group run by, she looks like she should be on the Housewives of Atlanta, some rich housewife with nothing better to do in the upscale area of Buckhead area of Atlanta, and just a nutcase on nothing but native plants. And I was speaking or getting out with her one time on her Facebook group and talking about it. I says, well, I says, there's other, talking about there's other things to worry about. And somehow the subject came up of tropical fruits being shipped 10, 20,000 miles away, like food miles. And her whole thing was, well, it's okay to ship tropical fruits from California to Scandinavia, even though that grapefruit you're eating for your breakfast in Finland has 25,000 food miles on it. She could give a crap about the supposed carbon that comes out of getting it there, or just the food miles, the cost to get it there. I'm not so much into the carbon cost, but the economic cost of it. And she's like, that's perfectly okay, but everybody should be planting native plants. So these single-minded people that get on a cause and don't know when to get off are dangerous. And they should just be told to shut up if they don't know what they're talking about. I'm sorry, but this type of stuff drives me crazy. Just like Epsom salts, banana water, and eggshells. And that pot's too big. So anyway, to wrap things up, the Butterfly Ranch, if you want to read this article, the article was written on, I think, if I get back up to the page here, February 22nd, 2021. So a little over 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, by Monica Makel. And it's under the category milkweed. There's 31 comments on the bottom. I'm not even going to go into them because they just keep going back and forth on it. And many of the people that are actually reading the article have changed their mind and said, thank you for setting me straight, etc., like that. So folks, remember, if something sounds too good to be true, like your tomatoes are not ripening because of the Canadian smoke and is causing cloudy weather, well, if it's causing cloudy weather, it's blocking sunlight from getting down. And I don't know if high enough, is cooling things down or not, but it certainly wasn't cool here in the Northeast. Late June and July, we had a lot of rain. I had 11 inches of rain in my backyard in July, and even middle of June, it started to rain again. It was unbearably hot. Now, normal temperatures with normal humidity, we get several issues of 95-degree temperatures and 100-degree heat indexes here in the Hudson Valley in New York, but they don't go on for weeks at a time. It's usually a couple days. During July, it goes away, comes back, but this was 10 days of it. The reason your tomatoes are not ripening is they stop growing, stop ripening, stop everything when it gets too hot. They go into a kind of funk. So you can bring your green tomatoes in, set them on a windowsill, put them in bags together because they had that same type of whatever gas it is that they have around. I don't know the name of it, that speeds up the ripening process. So don't worry, it'll cool off. Your whole garden will start growing again, except mine, which got destroyed in 10 or 11 inches of rain because unfortunately my garden sits in one of the low spots in the yard. And I didn't have the couple thousand or umpteen $1,000s to bring a bulldozer in and regrade the backyard, so I just got to deal with it. So there you have it. It'll cool off, your tomatoes will start to ripen, and as soon as they turn blush yellow or pink, bring them in, set them inside, and ripen them inside because they have everything ready to go there. And you won't have the neighborhood birds, insects, animals, or your neighbors eating your tomatoes when they're yours. Thanks for tuning in. You can pick this up on Spotify, Apple, Google, just about everywhere else. We'll be uploading the audio to YouTube later. And to sum things up, this is the Inside Out Gardener, formerly called the Indoor Gardener Podcast. I'm Greg Dreiss, your host. Been in the garden business for, 4 decades, longer than I care to count. Still in it, still doing a little bit of retail and also my own garden design and lawn care business. And to remind you that although they can be invasive, and that's another issue, the problem with tropical milkweed and monarch butterflies stopping the reproduction or not flying south is just gobbledygook. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you in the garden. Goodbye.